Have you ever thought, I wonder what a 200-foot tall roller coaster would be like if it were painted brown, themed to candy, and circled a giant Hershey's Kiss water fountain? Then this is the perfect video for you. I'm gonna rank every coaster and give them a review. Every drop and every hill, every launch and every loop. Rate it 1 to 10 and then we'll do it all again. Gonna rank and review every coaster. Candymonium at Hersheypark stands at 210 feet tall, with a top speed of 76 miles per hour, a track length of 4,636 feet, and a ride duration of about 53 seconds from the first drop to the final brakes. This makes Candymonium the tallest, fastest, and longest roller coaster at Hersheypark. But despite all that, it is still far from the most intense. And that's just because of the nature of this coaster model. Candymonium was manufactured by B&M as one of their many hyper coasters, which are known for their large hills offering copious amounts of sustained floater airtime. And Candymonium is no exception. While the sensation of floating out of your seat is extremely satisfying and exciting, it's not particularly intense. It's more along the lines of just fun, floaty, and graceful. And that's just the way of a B&M hypercoaster. And while Candymonium does fit that figurative mold of a standard B&M hypercoaster, it does stand out amongst the 7 others that I have been on. Candymonium has what I felt to be noticeably stronger airtime, as well as a few elements that vary from the redundancy of conventional airtime hills. Now, just for comparison's sake, Candymonium feels incredibly similar to Mako, with a similar scale and combination of hills, with hints of Orion scattered in by way of elements that are unconventional for this model. And both of those are really great rides, so this is definitely a generous comparison. But let's focus a little more on Candymonium specifically with the off-ride experience. Candymonium is the roller coaster that greets guests as they enter Hersheypark. It resides in the lively Chocolate Town area, which was completely renovated in 2020, along with the relocation and upgrade of the park entrance, and of course the addition of Candymonium. And this whole area, especially with Candymonium as the looming backdrop, is one of the best looking park entryways I have ever encountered. While this gorgeous setting certainly helps bolster the overall off-ride appearance of Candymonium, the coaster itself is aesthetically pleasing as well. It features a very uncommon silver support and brown track color scheme, which of course alludes to the ride's candy theme. This contrasts nicely with the red, blue, and orange ride vehicles, which represent Twizzlers, Kisses, and Reese's respectively. Further adding to the ride's candiness is a Hershey's Kiss-shaped water fountain, as well as a massive sign sporting the coaster's candy-filled logo. And I think this logo, along with the rest of the ride, looks great. Now, before riding Candymonium, you have to get in line, and before getting in line, you need to make sure you have grown to at least 54 inches tall. You'll also need to put your bags and other loose articles into a locker, which is free, which is awesome. Now, the queue line for this coaster does have a handful of both pros and cons. On the positive side, the queue line and station also continue the trend of delivering a pleasant appearance, featuring candy wrapper wallpaper as well as fun LED lights. Additionally, you will be entirely protected from the sun, as the queue line is fully covered and partially indoors. However, the downside to this arguably outweighs the benefits. A majority of the building can feel a little stuffy on a hot day, especially when you aren't close to the openings, but the biggest contributing factor to the discomfort is the tunnel right before the loading platform. This stretch has no ventilation, no air conditioning, no windows, like nothing to expel body heat. There is, I believe, one fan in the middle of this section, but that does absolutely nothing except to blow hot air on you. It was like 90 degrees outside when we were in here, and it had to have been at least 105 in the tunnel. I was on the verge of passing out, and I was not alone. Hershey absolutely has to do something about this hell tunnel, because it is genuinely not safe on a hot day. Switching back to a positive note, thanks to the relatively quick dispatches and high capacity, you will at least move through this section quickly. Candymonium does, however, however, regularly harbor one of the longest wait times in the park, and it typically remains that way all day. The best way to avoid getting stuck in the line for an hour plus is to take advantage of the hour of early entry into the park, which is provided to most season pass holders and guests of official Hersheypark resorts. Candymonium has little to no wait for nearly the entirety of early entry, even on busy days. If you can't get in for early entry, you can still get a very short wait time if you get to Candymonium right at park open, and sometimes there is a slight lull in crowds in the mid-afternoon. Once you are finally done waiting and you make it up to the station, you'll be assigned to one of the 7 rows. Or you can ask for a specific one, but I honestly found every row to be fun, with only slight differences from front to back. And I can get into more of why that is later on in the on-ride experience. As mentioned at the top of this video, Candymonium is chock full of airtime. There are a couple of moments throughout the ride that do offer other forces, but the minimal variety present in Candymonium primarily comes from different levels and types of airtime. Another contributor to the coaster's enjoyable ride experience is comfort. In addition to being very smooth, Candymonium's restraints consist of just a seatbelt and lap bar, allowing you to enjoy that airtime in the most open, comfortable, and non-intrusive way possible. But now let's get into the ride layout. Candymonium dispatches out of its colorful station directly into the lift hill, taking you to that aforementioned height of 210 feet. This is of course followed by the first drop, and this is one of my favorite first drops on any B&M. To bring Orion back up just for reference, this first drop feels incredibly similar to that one, just on a smaller scale. The profile of the track transitioning from the lift to the drop is relatively tight, so you get close to reaching your maximum angle of descent rather quickly. Then the track continues to curve slightly before leveling out near ground level. Thanks to this profiling, the drop gets you out of your seat quickly, and it keeps you out of your seat for nearly the entire duration of the drop. The strength of airtime is also good in all rows, which is great because sometimes the front rows get snubbed on first drops. The back row does get stronger airtime though, teetering on the lower edge of ejector airtime, while the rest of the train experiences very strong to moderate floater. So all that just to say that this drop gets straight to business and delivers some substantial floater airtime that is beautifully sustained. Candymonium then hits its first large airtime hill, which continues the trend of delivering top-tier airtime. If I can make another comparison, this hill is incredibly similar to Mako's first hill. It floats you out of your seat almost immediately, and you stay out of your seat for the entirety of the hill. This airtime is pretty much as sustained as it gets, lasting roughly a full 4 seconds. Now, the strength of airtime is nothing too intense, but it's still a pretty strong floater that borders ejector, and I think most importantly, the airtime is spread out evenly. Now, what the heck do I mean by that? Well, sometimes the back of the train will not get great airtime on the ascent of a hill, but it will get strong airtime on the descent, and for the front of the train, the opposite is true. So you're not really experiencing the hill to its fullest. But on Candymonium, and this is the case on all of its hills, every row gets lifted just as much as the next. There are of course still subtle differences of the strength of airtime in each row, but every seat still gets the same amount of airtime. And I think that helps set Candymonium apart because you don't have to feel like you're compromising in any row. Following that awesome hill, the coaster heads into a tall, overbanked turnaround. While rising in elevation, the track begins turning right, then left, and then decreases in elevation while pointing you in the exact opposite direction as before. You likely won't feel much on this turnaround, aside from a bit of positive G-forces, but the banking of the track at its highest point is so exaggerated that it almost feels like an inclined loop. That leads to enjoyable visuals high above the ground, and the train holds its speed well through this turn, so it all flows nicely. Candymonium then heads into another awesome airtime hill, which provides a very similar experience to the first. One key difference, however, is the presence of a trim brake. This little brake engaged on every ride that I took, and while it doesn't really affect the pacing or enjoyment of the ride, it can slightly impact the strength of airtime on this hill. This hill is still great though, and at worst you will get wonderfully sustained moderate floater airtime as opposed to wonderfully sustained strong floater airtime. So you're out of your seat for several seconds on end again, either way. The next hill yet again provides awesome, strong floater airtime, but since this hill is shorter in stature and low to the ground, it does have a much higher speed. And that speed is noticeable, so it's super fun to get lifted out of your seat while traveling so fast. This hill is an awesome change of pace to the tall, long, rolling hills before it. That speed hill is followed by a mid-ride helix that is capped off with an awesome off-axis airtime hill. And if you'd be so kind to let me make another Orion comparison, this feels quite similar to the helix on that, and the exit feels similar to this element as well. The helix itself is nothing too crazy, providing a mild yet noticeable amount of positive g-forces pushing your body down a tad. And while it's not that forceful, it brings a little variety to a coaster that is otherwise focused on airtime. Speaking of airtime, the exit of the helix provides some variety in that department as you get popped out of your seat while tilting sideways. The airtime here is pretty strong throughout the train, but the right side of the train actually feels it a bit more, as it's tossed up a bit higher due to the rotation of the track. The track twisting also provides some decent lateral forces, gently tossing you side to side, making this element much more dynamic than all the hills prior. The subsequent hill is sort of a combination of the second hill and the speed hill, as it's somewhat low to the ground, but still relatively large in stature. This allows for a nice balance of sustained airtime and fast pacing, and it's yet another hill that is just flat out fun. Now this hill also has a trim brake, but again, it very slightly affects the ride's speed and airtime, barely impacting the overall ride experience. That's followed by a large helix encapsulating that Hershey's Kiss fountain. While this turn provides absolutely no noticeable forces, it still feels decently fast, and its primary purpose is to deliver good visuals, both on and off ride, which it does well. By this point, the ride is almost over, but you do still have a couple little airtime moments. This small, twisting hill was the biggest surprise of the entire ride for me, as it delivered a really strong pop of airtime, potentially the strongest of the ride. It also tosses you around a bit laterally thanks to the twisting of the track, making this unassuming little hill a pleasant finale to the ride. Rising up into the brakes delivers the last brief pop of airtime, which was nothing crazy, but still a bit stronger than I expected. Now, the ride does feature one more swooping turn after this set of brakes, but it really doesn't do anything other than return you back to the station. So in my mind, the ride really ends here. So, what would I rate Candymonium? I would give it a near perfect score of 9.5 out of 10. So close to a 10, but I just don't think it's perfect. I do think it could have slightly faster pacing, which is honestly a hypercritical nitpick, but since most of its elements are large and drawn out, it doesn't feel as fast as some other coasters out there. But, that's just not the style of coaster that this is, and that's perfectly fine. Candymonium is still insanely fun, and that can't be overstated. The high-flying, sustained airtime hills are plenty exciting, and Candymonium does them better than just about anything else I have ridden. As far as where Candymonium lands in my rankings, it sits within the top 10% of coasters I have been on at number 26 out of 308. The scale and sheer amount of airtime puts it a couple slots above Lightning Run, but the near perfect pacing and variety of elements and forces on Copperhead Strike keep it from being higher up. But that's enough of my thoughts. I'd love to know what you all think of Candymonium in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this, and make sure to tune in next time where I'll be talking about 3 spinning coasters.